節。咁我哋
I think we can now start our second session, and we invite the deputations to come in.
To
remind deputations and individuals that you may use the earpiece. You can listen to Channel 0 for the floor language, Cantonese Channel 1, Channel 2 is English, Channel 3 is Putonghua. Each of you will have 3 minutes, and please also note that your speech and submissions will not be protected by the powers and privileges ordinance of this council. Please also note the notice to members of the public and the security measures mentioned in that notice. We will strictly enforce those measures. The notice is attached to the letter to you and also table today. If you wish to obtain a copy, you may ask the staff for assistance. And also, if you have a text for your speech, you may leave them with our staff so that members can use them as reference. Mr. Ho Kai Meng, you're first. First of all, I'd like to play, some music. I think all of us are familiar with this tune. This is the tune for the Mark 6 lottery. I've also, participated in I've also applied for the HOS, flat this time, but I think it's as difficult as winning a Mark 6 lottery. The housing department is saying that they don't have enough land to build housing units. When I was studying university, there was this popular saying that the university graduates would like to have a small house, marry a wife, have a kid, and own a car. These are the 4 goals which university graduates are chasing. A few years ago, decades ago, young people were scolded if they only limited their goals to those four things. But nowadays it's so difficult for us to find accommodation. Especially nowadays, even HOS flats are so expensive that it's beyond our means. Even if the total household income is about $30,000 a month, it's difficult for them to pay for the property prices. My mother just made some inquiries yesterday and asked whether or not there are any flats for sale for $5 million. And I worked it out as to how long I need to spend on making the payments. And how many years my wife will need to work before we can fully pay off the mortgages. And we're only talking about the cheapest flats. Situation is a lot different from it used to be. So the FTU has a suggestion. That is, the housing department may consider building HOS flats and sell them at cost. Some members of the public may argue that this is too much a subsidized form of housing, but we want the people who are not eligible for PLH, and those are earning $16,000 to $30,000 a month. It is for this group of income earners that they have a chance to acquire the property. Just yesterday, the Census and Statistics Department announced that the household median income is only $14,000. A couple together will earn about $28,000. For example, a newly built HOS flats, unless you are going to buy the smallest size units, otherwise even such a couple will not be able to afford to buy such an HOS flats. So could the government consider setting the price which is based on the construction cost to sell those HOS units? Our submission has already been handed to the Secretariat. Sorry, your time is up. Next, we have Ms. Seeking Sun. Thank you. The economy has recovered, and I think we can reinstate rent control. Now, I am a tenant in a subdivided flat in深水埗. Our living environment is really very poor. On rainy days, there will be water seepage, and there's spouting of the ceiling wall. And sometimes I have to cover the dishes I'm cooking before or they will be soiled. I have 2 kids. The URA has frozen our account, and I hope that the Hong Kong SAR government can offer us in situ accommodation because our kids will need to, study, go to school in the area. If there's no rent control, and also we are overcharged in respect of our utilities. I hope the government can also regulate the landlords. It wasn't me that opposed the tenant, but the tenant living next door to me complained that I talked to the tenant, and resulting in his having to pay $2,000 more in terms of rent. I think the dispute between the tenants and landlords should be dealt with by a department, and there should be, a mechanism for complaints to be resolved. If there's no channel for tenants to lodge the complaints, then they wouldn't know where to take the case to. Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Wong Siu Yin. Thank you. First of all, I find it regrettable that on an important hearing today, the Secretary is not present. I really regret this very much. I wonder how much importance the government is attaching to the housing question. Anyway, I will still need to make my speech. We belong to a group of persons who are concerned about housing resources in深水埗. Most of our members are Kai Fongs. The situation in the old districts are really very bad. Like the lady said just now, Kai Fongs living in the old districts are constantly being asked to pay more rents. Recently, a Kai Fong told me that his rents have been increased by 50%. He used to pay a subdivided flat for $3,000 to $4,000. Now he has to pay $7,000. To pay $7,000 for a subdivided flat of 100 square feet, how can that family survive? But every time we talk about rental issue, we're not even saying rent control. Just we're talking about supervision. So I hope the officials can reflect to the Secretary that we do not really. We're not asking for the impossible. If you see that there is a problem, is there anything that you can do to help us, resolve those problems? We also have some suggestions for the government. Every time we saying that on rent control, so never mind rent control, at least we should be ensured, a safe, accommodation, and also tenants should be given a reasonable, lease period. Otherwise, they will be arbitrarily evicted. Thirdly, I think there should be a 6-month notice period, because that notice period is necessary in order that the Kai Fongs can move to a different premises. The government or the Housing Bureau or the TNHB will also need to, resolve the question of the tenants being overcharged for the utilities. They are paying $2 for a unit of electricity. The government said that it needs to find land to build public housing units. Well, public housing is important, but then you also need to resolve the other issues like rent control and so on. One of the largest resource for public housing construction is land in the urban areas. I don't know whether or not you can refer this to the Development Bureau. Nowadays, land is being used to build luxury apartments. The深水埗District Council conducted a poll and found out that 80% of the typhoons are in support of redevelopment, that redevelopment must be for the building of public housing. Mr. Hey, we are an alliance of Kaifongs in深水埗and Chengshawan who mostly live in divided flats. Many of them are facing a big issue, which is the question of rising rents. At this time, tenants simply have no bargaining power. They have no say. They always have to worry that if they're fortunate, they can sign up a 1-year lease, and a year later they have to talk to the landlords. The landlords can ignore them, or even if they talk to them, they will simply tell the tenants that they're going to put up the rent. Many of the Kaifongs, if they're fortunate, will have the rents increased by a few hundred, but there are many whose rents have been increased in 4-digit numbers, and the basic household income make about 20 to 50% of the household income. So how can they afford such drastic increase in rents and have their salaries gone up by as much? So I hope the government can really implement rent control again, so that we can regulate the rate at which rents go up, so that rank and file households will have safe accommodation, and they don't have to worry that they have to move and look for other premises every year. Earlier on, the long-term housing strategy suggests that the government has a duty to provide for a stable rental market. We think rent control can exactly achieve that purpose and help government play this role. The government has also promised that after it has conducted a study, it is worried that if rent control is implemented, the tenants will be more choosy in leasing out the properties. Rents may be pushed up, and the tenants may use different excuses to get away from rent control. However, for the past 10 years, the same problems have been occurring. Right now, the tenants have more say than the tenants. They can increase the rents at any time, and they can do whatever they like. I mean, like in the case of tenants, most of the Kaifongs now are paying $1.50 or even $2 for a unit of electricity, and they're also arbitrary, and the water tariffs are also charged arbitrarily by the landlords. So if we're going to implement rent control, we hope that the rental adjustment should follow the rate of inflation, or inflation plus a certain percentage, but it should be capped below 10%. And the tenant should have a priority notice period of 6 months. I hope the government can reinstate rent control. Next, Ms. Chiang Lai-chen. Thank you. I'd like to say to people living in public housing units that everyone would like to have a home and live with their family members. We've come to this world because we want to build up our family. We want to live in a peaceful environment. Eventually, you and I cannot help being an independent person. When people depart, when a member of family departs, you'll be forced to leave the units, and because there is inadequate supply of public housing, they ask you to leave. Whether you're 18 or in the 60s, whether you're sick or handicapped, they will ask you to leave your PRX units. Of course, the government has the discretion, but they call it compassion, but sometimes it's not the case. There have been tenants who have certification by a doctor. They are given extension of 6 months, and later on, the housing department, the staff will say, will threaten them and say, you have to submit more documents. Even if the doctor allows you 6 months, why don't you accept 3? It's like haggling in a wet market. And eventually, they even ask the doctor to certify that you cannot leave your unit. And after the doctor letter has been obtained, they say there are some problems with wording of the letter, and they need to follow up further. And in the end, they say that it's not that you don't have to move out. So we don't know how our case, the case is being followed up. So why do we submit the doctor certificate? There's another sad case of a young girl whose mother passed away. Within 9 months to a year, the housing department issued a letter forcing her to leave the premises. She has not yet recovered from her grief. She had no choice but to accept. Since she was very worried, she wanted to be relocated to in the same district. The housing department said no because there are no units available. Under such pressure, she went. She became. She really, become mentally bankrupt and had to, consult a psychiatrist. So all these episodes are just the tip of the iceberg. The housing department doesn't care. They treat the people at the grassroots, they ignore the plight of the people at the grassroots level. We simply can't afford to move in and out of premises. They are treating us like objects. So are we considered treated like sinners? Why are they putting so much pressure on us? Is the housing department really exercising any discretion here? It resorts to all means to evict the tenants. Can that really help other people, be given PRH units earlier?
Choi Tong-kit. At the time, I was living in the wooden huts, and after that, I was evicted by force by the government, and I stayed in a 16-story building. Now, I was one of those who were relocated because the building was substandard. That was my second forced eviction. And this lays the foundation of my misery. Now, my mother's 83, I'm 48, and the flat is 34.3 square meters. And for someone as old as my mother and myself, living together in such a small unit was, of course, a danger in itself. And at the time, the housing authority said, yes, if you have a bigger unit in the future, you can buy the unit at some point. But my mother passed away in 3 weeks after moving into the flat. And right away, while I was still arranging the funeral, they evicted me. They wanted me to move. And there was a manager who took up my case, and he said, you can stay. But in 2010, I received a letter from them saying that I had to be evicted again. Nobody had told me that the unit was too big for me. When I moved in, nobody told me that actually the unit was a 4-person unit, and it was allocated to me and my mother. And my mother was 83, and she passed away shortly after. Now, let's talk about the Tongchong and Tinshui Wei. People who moved in the initial stages of the area's development, residents are told that the flats are now too big for them. Now, they're misleading us. They're setting a trap and lying to the residents. And the HA is saying, I do not care why you were put into those units, but the units are nevertheless too big for your purpose, too big for your household. And even though it's a mistake on their part in allocation at the point of allocation, but they don't care. But are they all powerful? Are we to take this line down? So how do we handle these units and Tin Shui Wai units where there are widespread situations like this? And you cannot ask us to move and cancel our qualifications. Yes, a lot of people have talked about the plight that they're in. In fact, for Hong Kong housing policy, housing had always been looked upon as a market or commodity issue. And the market forces are left to resolve the problems. But the situation is, after years of accumulation, for those who own flats or do not own flats, tenants, there are a number of problems, as reflected by people just now. It is because the people cannot have a clear understanding as to when they can own their own flat or when they can even just live in the rented flat. For how long they can stay there. It is because their rights have not been protected and their environment, living environment, is getting worse and worse. And the gap between the rich and poor in Hong Kong is getting wider and wider. There will have to be a change in thinking. The market cannot be left to solve housing problems. Between the market and the rights of people for their living or property there has to be a balance between the two. And from the government and their attitude, I do not see that there is a response to Dr. Cheung's question. Mr. Ying just referred Mr. Cheung to the document July last year. And it shows that the government is not sincere in listening to our views, and they are very much frozen in their stance. Perhaps our views are not very professional, but it is exactly what the officials need to hear, because here the officials do not have their ears to the ground. You think that only by increasing supply, the problems will be solved. But when you come down to the nitty-gritties, you see that the people, the ordinary people, where the bargaining power is too low and the balance of bargaining power is that diverse or that unbalanced, then there will have to be a changing of the paradigm or the mind frame, so that and understand that the free market is not all powerful. Yes, I represent those who are evicted because they are in units too big for their family. Now, this policy address is addressing this issue can be easily misunderstood. In fact, it is not just those who are in the present public housing units, but actually for those who are now in subdivided units, etc., or private rental units, they can still come under this kind of label. That is and also these overly spacious units are also being redefined. The definition can be lowered. That is, the area can be lowered. And once the person or the household had been identified as such, as occupying too big a unit, they will be evicted or relocated right away. And why is there this issue? It is about 10 years ago, or just over 10 years ago, if you know about their history. It is the 26 buildings, the saltwater buildings, and also the Harmony model buildings. In fact, the government purposely had a looser measure, and also in Tung Chung, Tin Shui Wai, etc. But while the government was doing that, at the same time, they were making it more stringent for public housing units in labeling some of the families as occupying overly spacious units, even in situations where an old person had just passed away. They were immediately evicted. So the government had not responded to the problem. Why singletons have not been able to access public housing? It is because 1,000 public housing units have to be retained and reserved for moving out of these overly spacious units families. If this need not be done, then these 1,000 units can be put into the market again to house singletons and other smaller families. Singletons already find it difficult. And why do you have this policy of forced eviction for the residents? The government is making the policy more and more stringent, and these families have to move away from the flat, from the area, and there are costs attached to moving as well. But the government does not turns a blind eye to all this, to the rights of the public housing tenants in the security of their living. Ms. MAI Chung-ping. Thank you. I also want to speak about this spacious unit plight of the public housing tenants. The government is saying that they want to have the families settled. However, this policy is a very troubling policy for the people, those in public housing with these so-called over-spacious units. The government is saying to them, or housing authority is saying to them, I give you 3 chances, I'm being nice to you, and if after the 3 chances you do not move, I will evict you, and you can go onto the streets, if all I care. And using this kind of measure to evict the people, they even say shamelessly that they've been given 3 times, and those who evicted are only those who did not take hold of make use of the opportunities, and therefore it is acceptable. But in fact, this is highly unacceptable. Is this how the government helped the people of Hong Kong to settle down? And also for these residents in the so-called overly spacious units, is because of death in the family, and there's only one left living in the unit. For these survivors, facing the threat of the housing authority, how can they not abide? And these are their houses, their homes, mind you. In the homes, there are a lot of memories of those who have passed away, of family members who have passed away, and these cannot be bought by any money. How can the housing authority force evict them given this? Well, some people say, look at the bright side, look into the future, maybe going to a small unit is better. But do you not know that this is like giving them a death sentence, this small unit? It means that the person cannot marry, cannot have kids, the family cannot grow. How can the future be better in that way? A lot of senior staff of the HA say that when they were young, they lived in these public housing units as well. But have they ever come across a situation where the family member died and they are force evicted, moved into a smaller flat, and robbed of their memories of a loved one in the home, and restricted to the family, the growth of the family, no children, etc.? Can you not come up with a policy that really puts the people's heart at ease in their dwellings? Lin Sui-lin, the government and the long-term housing steering committee are always coming up with the same slogan, saying that they are using the resources correctly without heed to the economic means or financial means of the public housing residents, and also the changing demographics of Hong Kong. I am speaking about this exactly, even though I am living in a spacious, so-called spacious unit, and you want me to move to a smaller unit, but very soon my son will be getting married, and then I will become an overcrowded unit, and I will have to move to a bigger unit again, moving and moving again, not only wasting public resources, residents' time, residents' costs, and also force evicting these spacious units rather than to do so. Why don't you increase the supply of public housing units so that the residents can have their own choice in moving or not to move? And where there is moving, there should be moving subsidies from the government. And where they do not want to move, they should be allowed to stay on in their original unit so that they can be settled and happy. Thank you very much. Ms. Chu-man-chan, please. Thank you, Chair. As a carer or a former carer, in the carer concern group, there are certain members who, because of the need to care for family members, they were wheelchair bound and then were moved to more spacious units or bigger units, and this actually is found to be a trap. That is, when the family member had passed away, even when the funeral was still going on, they have been labeled a spacious unit and been forced to move to a smaller unit. Is this good for the people of Hong Kong or not, this kind of policy of the housing authorities? It is not only about the time and mental pressure for the residents and a lot of wastage, and have you considered those? The carer had spent time and effort caring for the family member, and the government is encouraging stay-home care, and the family members, the carers, have to abandon their career or jobs to care for the old in the family, and also depleting his or her own savings in caring for the aged in the family. And for the forced evict concerned group members, some of them have to take out a loan from the bank in order to move, because they have to refurbish the unit before turning it back to the housing authority. And the housing authority says economics is not a defense, and they have to be evicted nevertheless. Why are they so cold? Why are these policies? The HA says because there is insufficient housing. Well, in the housing authority or the housing policy, those who are formulating the housing policies, they have such close relationship with the property developers. They are only thinking about the latter's benefit. Do they ever think about our welfare, the residents' welfare? Do you want to make all housing or public housing residents to buy flats before they can have a stable dwelling? Why do you want them to be so unsettled, move around all the time? Well, I actually wanted to talk about rent controls, but having heard all that, I cannot stop myself from talking about this. Yes, the government always says that the public housing resource is very precious, but the government had been wasting the resources, and they have come up with all sorts of lies to cover up their action. Now, this is exactly the policy I want to talk about, the wastage of resources, which also is a wastage of administrative resources. As Kai Fongs have talked about, this is the issue of the spacious unit, so-called spacious unit. They've been asked to move, and the tenant after a couple of years, a son gets married and they become an overcrowded unit and they are asked to move again. And it's been mentioned by the government that 10 weeks is necessary to refurbish an emptied or vacated unit, where the residents are moving into smaller units and then back into bigger units. There will be time when the units are left vacant. This is wastage of resources on the part of the government. And also for this policy of spacious unit, not only does it waste public resources, but also the resources of the residents themselves. Have they never thought about the moving costs, the refurbish costs, the fitting out costs? The furniture have to be changed, moving from a big unit to a small unit. And what about neighbor relationship? What about social network? These social resources, are they not social capital as well? This is communism, segregating or divvying up interests. The government is colluding with the property developers. Is the property of the property developers property and the property of the ordinary people not property? There is an inclination towards property developers, allowing them to accumulate land, making them enemies of the common people. But even so, the government dare not shake them up. And the government very often uses a pretext of opposition to resumption of land or building of public housing as excuses and not resolving the problem. Please stop these practices. Please stop building big white elephants and really address the housing needs of the people. And also the taxes, such as vacant units taxes and other taxes and means to address this issue. Please, the government, would you please come up with that? Ms. Tang Mankit, I think what is most urgent for the people of Hong Kong, Ms. Kam Man Fong, is the issue of housing. And our party believes that the main direction and recognition is correct. But in this macro environment, political environment, there are environmental people who object to harbor, extending into the harbor or resuming certain areas in Hong Kong, and therefore we are not optimistic about being able to find more land. But our proposition is there should be a right balance between public housing and also privately participating building. And when we say we want to help the grassroots, there will have to be sufficient private housing supply as well for those who aspire to own their own flats. And there must not be overly big fluctuations, otherwise it will impact negatively the economic and the financial system in Hong Kong. The 6-4 or 60% to 40% formula we find acceptable. But having said that, there have to be very clear positioning of the different types of housing. Public housing is for the grassroots, the subsidized flat purchases is for the middle class, and the government must not, because of short-term objectives, change this formula. Otherwise, there will be long-term disruption and losses. In the UK, in the 70s, there was a policy of stimulating the market, and in the 90s, 1998, they have sold some 80,000 units. 1998 to 2011.
Okay.
Well, as a result, there was a huge shortage of council houses. Well, the New People's Party objects strongly to the sale of PRH units. Well, we objected to the TPS, the tenant purchase scheme, because for every PRH unit sold, it deprives of a family the chance to be housed in public housing. The government should remember that subsidized housing is to help people have a roof over their heads and not help them get rich. If you allow HOS owners to rent out their flats upon payment of a premium, that is not the way to help people get a home, and we have great reservations in this regard. Next, Ms. YAU Mei-po. First, declaration of interest. I'm not affiliated to any political parties. I answer to my conscience. Well, legislators and government officials, have you ever thought about the lives of Hong Kong people? I've read some information. The steering committee of the LTHS, in 2015, on the 10th of February, a member bought a property, number 33 Parkinson Road at the Peak. Purchase price $36 million. Have you ever thought about how many people are living in subdivided flats, flats with a leak, and PRH units? I don't know why the government would appoint someone like that to sit in the steering committee, and I don't care, because C.Y. Leung and his government is just a bunch of jokers. Let's look at the election committee. 1,200 people. There are over 450 of them belong to developers. 8 from Cheung Kong, Sun Hung Kai, quite a number of them. Have you ever thought that there is a collusion between the government and the business sector, and there is also interest transfer? Do you know why property prices are so high? And you have so many committees, and have you considered the backgrounds of these members? Have you explained to the public? No, nothing. You watch each other's back. You get yourselves together and collude together and have interests transferred. Hong Kong people are easy to govern. Hong Kong people are bullied. Do you have a conscience? I have to speak out because I do it for justice. Hong Kong people have woken up. If this is the way you lead, Hong Kong people will be forced to rise up. This is not a threat. Hong Kong people have had enough. Hong Kong people are angry. We just want a decent life, to be able to make a living. We don't have to kneel before you. We have our ways to make money. In 2013, the physical reserve was $700 billion. This year, it has risen to $810 billion. We've been asking you about the figures of land you've hoarded. Have you explained to Hong Kong people? Well, let me tell you, please stop resuming land. Increase the ratio of public housing to private housing. Next. Ms. CHING Hang-ying. When it comes to housing policy, I see that there are a lot of people who have the knowledge. They have done a lot of studies, and they have given a lot of valuable comments. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. Well, I have this book in my hand. Is published in February. It's from a civic body. And there is also another survey about housing. But I'm worried because have government officials listened to them? Have these government officials read this information? Or they just think up plans and strategies behind closed doors without having regard to the real situation? I would like to tell the officials that a lot of Hong Kong people have woken up. We will closely monitor the government. We will protect Hong Kong people's interest. We have seen that there is an urgent need to have more PRH units to solve the housing problems of Hong Kong people. The government said there is a lack of land supply, and at one point they said that they need the agricultural land in NTNE, and they want the land in Country Park, and they want to reclaim land. But these are all destructive measures. Do we not have any better way? In 2012, in July, the Development Bureau, in reply to questions asked by legislator, came up with a list of vacant government land. There was about 2,000 hectares of vacant land. It's been 2 years. Has the Development Bureau provide detailed information about these vacant lands, say for example size, location, and how long they've been left vacant? I've heard from some civic parties that they've been asking such information for 4 years, but to no avail. Without such information, how do you expect us to work together with you to resolve the problem, as you've always said we should? And I want to ask legislators, have you followed this up? When the government said they want to destroy Country Park, agricultural land, and reclaim, well, have you followed this up? Have you come up with some solution? Did you say that they should first develop these vacant land? And 2,700 hectares of military land. Well, the Secretary, Mr. Lai, said that these military sites are not vacant. Your time's up. Next, Liberal Party. Housing policy should not be focused just about letting people have a roof over their head. Public housing also help youngsters to move up the social ladder. It's also chance for them to accumulate wealth, and this should be the objective of the policy. But we have rising property prices. The income and asset limit has been detached from reality. And there is also the sandwich class. They are not eligible for public housing, and they have to turn to private housing. They are enslaved to their subdivided flats. We need a housing policy that help people move up the property ladder. In order to do that, you should allow existing tenants to enjoy deductions from their in income and asset limit. You have to take into account that they have to pay for transportation and meals when they work. These should be deducted to accurately reflect disposable income of a household. And you should give them more room to save, and you should help youngsters to have a family and have a home. This is a way to improve their standard of living and give them the drive to move up in society. Some children are forced to move out of the PRH unit because they don't want the parents to become rich tenants. And these children feel that they are falling into an abyss. We have two suggestions to increase supply of public housing. First, to allow private developers, when they put in a tender, if they're willing to cooperate with the government and build a certain number of subsidized housing, then the plot ratio of residential or commercial areas can be relaxed. This is a way to increase public housing supply. And this will also diversify the design of PRH estates instead of the monotonous design of the HA. And there are also some old estates. They're just at about 10 to 20 stories high. It should be redesigned, make better use of greening areas, slopes, and build new PRH estates and relocate those in old ones over there, and which is quite close. Your time's up. Next, Mr. Dan Chan. We have high property prices, a lot of lots of middle class will have to rent first. But because of the cooling measures, there is a drop in available units for rent. People simply can't save enough to pay for down payment. How are they supposed to buy? And we proposed an idea. Well, eligible people can rent for 5 years at the market rate, and after they've accumulated enough to pay for down payment, and they will be allowed to do so. Say, for example, for PRH units is 5,000 in the private sector. The private sector, they will be able, the going rate is about 10,000. Well, people living in PRH units, even if they pay for higher rent, they'll be able to save. People who have just got married, there is really an urgent need for them to buy a flat. And there should be a new scheme to allow newly wedded people to get a PRH unit. For those who cannot live in these PRH units with higher rent, there should be rent subsidy given to them. And there should be import of labor. The government plans to build 80,000 units in the coming 5 years. Adding to that are other infrastructural projects. There is not enough labor. We need 40% more of labor. Some people may say we have to protect the interest of local labor. And people who advocate this idea are accused of siding with developers. But we have only 3.3% of unemployment. So we have practically full employment. There are only 5 people working, but 10 vacancies. So no matter how much you offer, there is still 5 vacancies. For conglomerates, they can offer a higher salary. But what about SMEs? They won't be able to do so. Does it mean that they have to close their business? Well, even if you offer a higher pay to poach people from other sectors, what will happen if there is an economic downturn? What if there is a drop in number of construction projects? These people will lose their job, just like those surplus teachers. And I've read in the newspapers that there is a high salary offered for barbenders to recruit university graduates. I don't know whether they should be happy about this. Next is Mr. Victor Ng. Well, young people who can't buy a flat, people who want to buy a bigger flat, we are all angry because all the housing policies have failed. And we've heard some experts, doctors, professors saying that, well, there are some people who are able to buy their own flats. And as a result, there are more different measures being put in place. Say, for example, tightening the loan-to-income ratio. Don't you think that property prices will continue to rise in the coming 3 years? They want to rely on themselves. They don't want to rely on their parents, but because of these measures, they have to come up with more in down payment. You expect those people who have married to rent. You know, a lot of girlfriends will only marry you when you have a flat. And for some people, they want to trade up, but they are unable to do so. Are they supposed to just put in a petition and let the children live there? Look at the figures. Mortgagee purchase has dropped to a new low, less than 1%. So these new measures are wrong. You've been making mistakes for a number of years. These are high land prices, and as a result, developers will have to pay more to buy land. 2 or 3 years ago, there is still a mortgage ratio of 95%. Not everyone are like Leung Kwok Kong, who can live in a PRH unit. We want to rely on ourselves to buy in the private market, but we have our savings, but it's not enough. Well, there are also people who would like to make available their flats for rent. It's not for speculation. And you now talk about rent control. It's useless. As a result of rent control and these numerous policies, property owners will be more picky. You should separate the private sector from the public sector. For those in the private sector, just let the market work. People who can afford it will buy flats. Don't stop them. We're very, very angry. The government should launch suitable solutions and targeted solutions to solve the housing problem. Next, Mr. Kin-wing. We're here to talk about the LTHS and the policy address. During the election, C.Y. Leung talked about seeking changes while keeping stability. And I think that this should be changed because he's trying to stall. He talked about a number of measures, but we have not heard anything done. We should learn from history. 1987, there was the LTHS, there was a proposal. In 1998, there was another long LTHS. It's changed and changed. In 2002, Michael soon announced to halt HOS production and the TPS. And then C.Y. Leung took office. The policies changed. It's changed for the 15th time. And I think what the government is trying to do is to push up property prices, to support property hegemony, and to enslave Hong Kong people to their properties. It's actually real estate that leads and supports our economy. Why did this happen? It's because of government policy that favors the business sector and developers. There are numerous measures and schemes to help people buy that result in this. We have about $900 billion, which accounts for over 30% of our GDP. These are the amount related to mortgage. If we continue to enslave the people to their property, then people will become poorer. And the FS gloated when he announced that we have received a lot more than expected when it comes to salaries tax. But there is a high concentration of wealth. Business sector is very wealthy, but people are poor. When the property market bursts, everyone will suffer. It's not just about people living in subdivided flats and young people enslaved to their property. We need capital gains tax because we need to curb speculation, to keep PRH units as a place to live in. And please stick to building houses to house people. Leave PRH tenants alone. Your time is up. Next is Ms. Chung Man-wai.
Thank you. I fully agree with the gentleman next to me. We've come to the present state, and all the fault is that of the governments. A few years ago, the government said that Michael Soon's 9 measures were meant to stabilize the market, but eventually they want to support the property market. Active non-intervention actually means active intervention. All the policies are slanted, especially housing policies. And that's why today, even if we don't eat, we don't do anything, if we just save money, we wouldn't be able to save enough for the down payment in more than 10 years. In 2002, when Michael Soon came up with those measures, and then we have policies relating to well-off tenants, and then demerit system, all meant to evict the PRH tenants, because the government said that there's a ladder for people to move up from PRH to HOS and then the private market. All that is an illusion. All these old, mindsets are wrong. Nowadays, can you afford to buy an English flat? They will charge you according to the market rate. Can we afford it? Not to mention the private, properties in the market. We've heard about government officials buying a property unit costing more than $30 million. How can we afford that? We need to, satisfy the housing demand of the people and not speculation. Now, even if you adopt any draconian measures, you cannot resolve the core problem. If you want to resolve the housing problem, you have to cut the red tape. So don't evict the PRH tenants. For young people, if they want to buy property, of course they will have their own way to do it. Instead of you're coming up with well-off tenant policy to evict the PRH tenants, you also kept telling people you're not in favor of universal retirement, and then you evict the well-off tenants away from the PRH units. So what sort of policy is that? Your policies are contradictory. In the end, the first thing the government needs to do is to, cut the red tape and immediately, impose a capital gains tax. And then next, for any form of subsidized housing at all, don't think about it. I think you should really instead be thinking about social housing. We need genuine social housing, and not, using social housing as a pretext and ask people to buy their own property and subsequently become a slave to the mortgage plan. We all know that. I hope the government will also stop, the sale of any form of subsidized housing going forward. Thank you, Chairman. I live in Kwai Chung Estate. Since the day, I've also lived in resettlement areas before I moved in the PRH unit. I've witnessed the development of public housing in Hong Kong for 50 years. All along, we've not been able to resolve the housing problem because the government fails to take up make a commitment, and it's evading its responsibility, claims that it has money but there's no land. But then why is the government putting up so much land for sale? Is the government so poor that it must rely on land sale to generate revenue? Why doesn't the government build more PRH units? You're always, suppressing the PRH tenants, saying that we are already being well treated and pampered. I really like to ask the Housing Authority and the officials, when we first live when we move into the resettlement area blocks, we actually swap our unit for the fishing junks that we gave up. So we didn't get those resettlement block units for free. Now that we're living comfortably in PRH units, and as our children have grown, actually I've retired already. I've worked since I was a teenager. I'm now in my 60s. I've retired now. I've witnessed the history of public housing development. It should be a blessing, a good thing for children to grow up, because I can now retire and enjoy my retirement. But that's not the case. The HA and the government all of a sudden come up with the well-off tenants and forcing us to leave, and we cannot live in peace. So my question for the government is this: does it have any commitment for the people, for a government that is so rich? I mean, the rank and file in our community are getting poorer and poorer. Some academics have conducted studies which show that 1 out of 5 PRH households are poor. You call us well-off tenants. Why have we become well-off tenants? It's because our children have grown. We worked so hard throughout our lives, and today we're just contributing everything we have to the developers. property prices have soared by so much. And all this is the fault of the government. There is no regulation. The government is not doing anything. The government is saying that if they did anything, it would affect the business environment. The Sunrock Hotel, which has been operating for 55 years, why did it close down? It's because the rents were too high. Next, Mr. Fu Chin-fu. Thank you. I've heard many deputations and individuals saying that the PRH public housing policy is very unfair. I don't know. I'm rather curious that would there be any people speaking on behalf of those who are on the waiting list or those who are living in subdivided flats? They are also queuing up for PRH. Without the policy for well-off tenants and tenants with over provision of space, I mean, how can the people in the subdivided flats have a chance to be allocated PRH units? The problem now is that there is insufficient supply of public housing units, and we have to come up with a way to allocate resources so that everybody will get a fair social subsidy. I've heard some deputations saying, suggesting that the PRH units should be given to people to live in for life and even for their children after they pass away. I don't think PRH units are hereditary. PRH units, it's always been a means to subsidize low-income households and to help them resolve the housing problem. When your children have grown and they have the ability, then they should make their own living. They can either buy their own property or lease their own property. But if you live in a PRH unit, you want the children and grandchildren to continue to stay in the same unit, that would not be fair. I've heard a lot of such comments, and government has come out with all kinds of policies. It has been suggested that in between PRH and HOS, there will be a new form of sandwich type of housing. This is contradictory. The so-called sandwich class housing is for those people who earn more than the HOS applicants but can't buy private property. It would appear that that sector has disappeared. And what happened to people who are below the HOS level? So how can they buy property in between, PRH and HOS? But what about now? It is suggested that we should use all the land to build PRH and HOS. But for people who don't qualify for HOS, should they just lease their own property? Should they become a slave to their own property, or any other ways we can help them? The latest draconian measure, as some individuals said, are rather ridiculous. People have to pay a bigger initial down payment, and that is the biggest hurdle for young people. And the 10% increase is something which the additional mortgage payment required is something that people cannot save up enough.
I'd like to begin asking this question to Mr. Stanley, that in the last year, how many times the housing department has given interpretation services to the ethnic minority when they come on the day of selection for express scheme, for the express scheme flat allocation? Why I'm asking this, because many of South Asians have got tremendous difficulties in understanding the application procedures and also the application process for applying public housing as well as for applying for express schemes actually they are applying, which can help them to get housing faster than the normal timing. I would like to share a case where I accompany a client, I accompany an applicant to the housing department on the day of selection, and on that day after registration, actually we move into the briefing session room, and then the staff from the housing authority giving briefing to all the clients sitting there, applicants sitting there, how to go through the selection process and how you can select flat for yourself. But I can see that only he was speaking in Cantonese all the time, neglecting the need of the South Asians sitting there. There were around 6 to 8 South Asians sitting there. And at the end of the briefing session, he just moved to the end and just spoke one sentence in English. So now, knowing simple Cantonese in English does not mean understanding terminology and specific terms that are mentioned in the policies in the system. Therefore, this is, in another case, because of this language barrier, an applicant lose one chance of getting public housing. In another case, an applicant actually lost because of this misunderstanding of clear explanation from housing department that whether it is extended urban area or urban area, an applicant actually lost his 3 chances and then had to apply again in 2008. Family of 9 members, they are in difficult need for public housing, but because of this insufficient resources in terms of explanation and interpretation, the families actually cannot get the public housing. And then this I can see as a clear indirect discrimination towards South Asian living in Hong Kong from housing authority. And we have not been actually, South Asian have not been put in the agenda of housing department to solve the special needs. Therefore, I suggest that housing authority can have a culture sensitivity training to the frontline staff, as well as provide some cue card system to show to the applicant that which language do you want to have interpretation, and then take initiatives to speak whether they really need the interpretation service or they do not need the interpretation service. Thank you.
Thank you. 下一位係李家樹先生。
Mr. Lee Ka-kit, I fully agree with the gentleman. We also want to help the ethnic minorities, and we've also reflected to the housing department about the language issue. Many South Asians know how to speak Cantonese, but they may not understand the technical terms or even properly express themselves. When it comes to housing application, sometimes they don't even know why their eligibility has been cancelled. In our center, we've come across a case where the mother doesn't know Cantonese. She has a son who speaks a little Cantonese. And the interviewing officer kept speaking to her in Cantonese, speaking very fast, and she didn't understand at all. And the interviewing officer, after 20 minutes, we have, a social worker present and ask him whether he could provide for interpretation service, and the interviewing officer said that won't be necessary. The South Asians are very fluent in Chinese. So even if someone requests for the service, the interviewing officer would refuse to provide that. Eventually, the housing department asked a South Asian who is working as a security staff in the department to work as an interpreter. That is totally unprofessional. And also, from 2010 to 2013, there are only 100 times when people use the telephone service. And the interpretation service has only been used 3 times. So I don't understand what is the policy of the housing department. Over the years, since 2012, our center has reflected this problem, but it doesn't seem to have been any improvements. So I'd like to ask, what is the policy of the HD regarding the ethnic minorities? Some people have said that spending the resources on the local or ethnic minorities would mean less resources for the Hong Kong people. But then all of them are Hong Kong permanent residents. Otherwise, they wouldn't be eligible for public housing. And it's not a question of resources. We just want the HD to seriously use its existing resources to help the ethnic minorities. It's only a matter of enforcement. 2 more questions. First of all, since 2013, we have not received the figures regarding the number of times interpretation service was used, and also inquiry services. And secondly, what more policies would the housing department have to help the ethnic minorities, handle their housing applications? Over the last couple of years, I have not seen the housing department, coming with any such policies?
I'm from ethnic minority concern group on equal access to government services, and actually housing problem affect the overall poverty situation of EM. High rents, particularly in YAU Mei-po district, which is our service area, make the condition so worst, and utilities are overcharged to ethnic minorities, and mostly because of language barrier they are badly discriminated. And because of language barrier, as my friend already told you about that because of language barrier, very often their public housing application is affected and they need to wait longer in compare with local Chinese. Housing department is not providing enough language support like interpretation services to EM. I also want to share a case that one of our member, she tried to apply for public housing in 2009, and because of language problem, she can't understand the procedure, and housing department sent back the application form to her because there was some documents missing there. But because she can't understand well, that's why they just keep on sending back the documents to her, and she can't successfully apply until she contacted us last year, and we helped her to apply successfully. And actually there was no service given to her to get some clear information or clear instruction that how she can successfully apply. And other than this, I just want to demand from public housing and government that they should improve their administrative procedure and staffing structure to achieve genuine and easy access to public housing applicants for all, and more efficient interpretation service for equal access to housing department services. And actually the frontline officers training is the most important thing, and the government and housing department should pay attention to that. If they will not have enough culture sensitivity, they cannot actually help EM applicant. As many of the members sitting here, they already mentioned about high rents, low supply of public housing, but actually I also want to insist that EM should not be neglected because they don't know the language or they are not Chinese. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. 下一位係賴建國先生。
好，多謝主席。咁咧就今日我哋
Thank you. We are very disappointed today that the Secretary had not attended the meeting, and only Mr. Ying is here. And the long-term housing policy and the policy address have not addressed the housing problems faced by the grassroots of Hong Kong. And we now know that there is not even a minority language version. And does it mean that Hong Kong does not consider them as part of our Hong Kong residents? Now, we are looking at dire situations for subdivided flat residents, toilet subdivision we're talking about even, and huge rental hikes, higher than the Kwun Tong Yut Hua Fong development even. And there have been a few times of people being burnt to death in these units. Does the government know that they are not helping the people, but rather than giving them another kick? Now, looking at the report and the promulgations from the government, it's all about rebuilding the ladder, the housing ladder. Well, if you remember, in the 1990s and 2000, there had been certain such situations. For example, rental control. Now, the government is saying that it's unsuccessful rental controls, but in fact, from various bodies, we see that there are other data as well. Yes, France and Holland had not been successful in certain in their measures of rental control, but on the other hand, there had been certain aspects which were successful as well. Perhaps we can think about these successful aspects. For example, in providing creative measures such as transition units, transition housing units. There are certain units, like 3,000 in total, which can be made for this purpose, and vacant school campuses can also be used. Maybe there would be some 40 units as well. So we should think of more ways, and also empty quarters, government quarters, can also be utilized. Where there are cheap or inexpensive subsidized housing, we do not want these to be hawked off or sold, but rather be used for public housing units again. Mr. Ying, every hour of your work, are you helping the people of Hong Kong, the grassroots? We do not want to see any more burnt residents. Mr. Chung Ying-kit? Mr. Chung? Chung Yat-kit? Thank you. In the next 10 years of housing target, the government wants to increase supply. And also 48,000 units, and in the next 10 years, 160,000 units. And it seems that the Hong Kong people should be happy about that as being able to be to settle in one's houses, in one's own property. And those who have the means can even buy private houses. But on the other hand, have you looked at the past 5 years? The 160,000 units, 77,000 are public and subsidized sales flats. And if you look at the median income, it is $14,000. So a double income family, wife and husband, would be $30,000 monthly income. And is that sufficient to buy, private houses? For public housing units, it is 10,600. But there are more private housing units and HOS units. It is 7 times that of public housing units. I do not know why there is this allocation. From the news, I noticed that there's a couple born after the 80s, and they have saved up for sufficient money as a deposit to buy a flat. Well, it is because the husband refrained from taking the bus or the MTR, or walked, refrained from breakfast. The nurse, who is the wife, refrained from eating a proper lunch. She only had 1 piece of bread for lunch. For what? So that they can get up the housing ladder. They are typical of Hong Kong couples. They are living under the poverty line in actual fact, because they're eating only 1 piece of bread for lunch, and they have to pay what? Income tax, stamp duty for buying property, and in the future buy a more expensive flat because of the high land price policy of Hong Kong. And when they have children, the area that they have in their house would be, per head count, would be less than the public housing residents. Have you thought about them? 7 times for private housing as opposed to public housing. And these people who live in these units are also Hong Kong people, but they do not benefit. Yes, we end the session at 1 o'clock. Can you have 5 minutes? The administration will have 5 minutes to respond, and then we'll have another round of questions from the members. Well, if that is a time limit, then I'll have to be concise. I would like to thank the friends for coming up to speak on the long-term housing strategy. It is a long-term strategy. There will be a long time for us to work on it, and your views will be taken into account fully. There are 3 types of housing which we have strategy on. One on subsidized sales flats, private housing flats, and also the public housing flats. For public housing building, there doesn't seem to be a lot of controversy, but for the government to build subsidized flats, it seems that there are objections. Some people are for it, some people are against it. As for private housing, we have a number of measures and controls, but different people seem to have different thoughts again on this. In our consultation period, we have also noticed that. In our long-term strategy, having taken into account public opinions, well, basically there are 3 lines. One, in terms of rental, public housing, we want to be building faster and more. And the existing public housing, we want to utilize them better. And also for subsidized sales flats, we want to have more land and more supply. And also we want to be able to circulate the existing public housing units. Now, apart from that, is there anything that is more richer in terms of meeting the needs of those who want to own their own flats? And at the same time, for private housing, we would want to provide more private flats with more land supply. And also, there will be some measures, that is, prohibitive measures from the government, which will combat the speculation. And we will consider future and further measures as well, so that the housing market can develop healthily. This is the main framework. If we have time, we can go into further details. But because of the limitation of time, I would go straight to an issue raised by a number of friends. In terms of public housing supply, we want it to be faster and more, but it takes land and it takes building time. 2 to 3 years ago, when we first started with this building, we have not come to the optimum of the volume yet. And under the long-term housing strategy, we will want to build 290,000 sold and rent units. But for land, we only have 250,000 units supply. So we have to continue looking for land, and hopefully you will all support that. Now, as for new buildings for public housing, there's another major source, and that is the circulation of existing units. Every year, because of various reasons, on average, we have about 7,000 units resumed. In the future, I do not know what the quantity would be, but if for the next 10 years that is still the average, then that is a major number. Now, for the steering committee and also the audit committee department, they all look at whether the units are used to the optimum. And there are a number of issues there. One, the policy concerning wealthy tenants and on spacious tenants. And I understand that there are different feelings attached to that. Last year in October time, there is a subcommittee under the steering committee which had exactly discussed these two policies, that is on wealthy tenants and also on spacious tenants. Some people favor more stringent measures, some favor more leniency. And at the time, there was no consensus reached. But indeed, these are important issues. And in the future, there will be further discussions. On spacious units, there are already data raised just now. I will not repeat them here, but one point to note, and that is at the meeting, I see that the housing authority members are they are in the know, and there will be more creative measures. For instance, for death of a family member, for this kind of cases, there will be a 1-year grace period given. And we also know that there are moving costs, and therefore in moving subsidies, there are new measures. Madam Chair, can you give me a bit more time, because I have not responded to the English speakers.
How we communicate with people who do not speak Cantonese or Mandarin. We do not have a policy that discriminates people on the basis of ethnicity, although we have a residency requirement. And also it is our policy to try our best to provide suitable assistance in communicating with us. The details that the two speakers mentioned, I honestly do not cannot grasp the full details. But if there are cases, we'll be very happy to look into them. I do understand that we do have some established arrangement with NGOs, working through NGOs to provide interpretation services for people who don't speak Chinese. We will continue to work on this.
我請議員發言，第一位係
Yes, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, 4 minutes, question and answer. For this long-term housing strategy steering committee members, if I can read out their names. 1, Cheung Chen-yun. Familiar name, isn't it? It's a super supporter of C.Y. Leung, head of his supporting team. Cheung Kwok-kwan, DAB. Chang I-min, supporter of C.Y. Leung in the property sector. The only grassroots is Wong Kwan. Wong Kwan was once a C.Y. Leung supporter, perhaps not now. And there's Woo Moon-hoi from the housing society. We know that the housing society does nothing valuable. They say that they are building more expensive buildings for the people of Hong Kong. Lau Ping-cheung, also supporter of C.Y. Leung, once a LegCo member, permanent secretary. For this kind of a name list, how can you explain this name list? How did this come by? Was it by drawing of lots? Especially for Barry Zhang Chan-yun. Everybody knows him, that he is involved in a criminal case. Now, what is the outcome of that case, at present no one knows. You should dismiss him. Yes, the composition of the committee. Madam Chair, I apologize that I came into the position in April of last year, and at the time the steering committee had already been completed its work and already disbanded. Now, as for the background of the committee members, I have not come into contact with those and have not looked into those. But in the past 2 years or so, in addressing this major housing issue, the steering committee had conducted a number of fora and public consultation and deputations, much like what we have here. And to me, I really had not come into contact with the steering committee members. I've seen their reports. And after that, when I came into position, it was really talking to you at the LegCo and the committees. I do not know. Perhaps Alice came to the position earlier than I did. Perhaps she can supplement. Yes, Madam Chair, by way of supplement, for the consultation committees and committee set up by the government, it would encompass people from different sectors. There were also grassroots representatives as well as academic and other persons who were familiar with the housing issues in Hong Kong. There was a friend just now. Basically the committee had been disbanded, but while the committee was in action, it was very transparent in operation, and there were declarations of interests. And also there were 6 public fora for consultation, and the committee members went to all 18 districts and DBs, and whether it be political parties or other organizations which have invited us, we went there as well as the LegCo panel. So it was very comprehensive in collection of opinions. Yes, the only grassroots one can say is Wong Kwan. Cheung Kwok-kwan represented a political party. Lee Wah-ming is now retired also from the political party. Fong Gong. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, friends, for coming up to this session, taking so much of your time. But I have the same view as you, and that is the measures that have been meted out by the government. I do not see how effective or there's any effectiveness. Rather, they are being prohibitive for the young people who want to get onto the housing ladder. So I simply do not understand what measures these are from the government. Now, going back to the long-term housing strategy, we know that in the next 10 years there will be 49,000 units built. And the government just now said that there will be 290,000 units for public housing and private, some 190,000 units. My question is, in the next 5 years, there is a number, 160,000 units. Can you, every year, year by year, can you list out clearly of the 290,000 units from now to 2024 or 2025, every year, how many units will be completed? How many for public housing? How many for subsidized sales flats? So if we have that number, and also for private housing units, or total of 190,000, how are those going to be supplied? By the knowledge of these numbers, we will be able to know, for those who want to buy flats or get onto the ladder, they will know what to do, whether they should buy or wait. Now, the government, also a friend talked about the shortage of labor. Can you not specify this? I mean, can you not? If you can make it clear year by year what the supply would be, that would be useful for would-be buyers. I think there are 3 questions here. First of all, the Hong Kong MA, in coming out with measures for the mortgage, combating speculation. It is because of financial market considerations that the Hong Kong MA had come up with this anti- or counter-cycle measures. Second question concerning the units completion data. Under the long-term housing strategy, there will be an estimate of internal need or demand. It is 480,000 units for the next 10 years. Now, it's a two-pronged approach. For private housing, the government will provide land for the private sector to build the 190,000 units. And for the public sector, will be responsible for the 290,000 units. Mr. Fang asked for completion numbers for the coming years. In the next 5 years, yes, we can provide that. Then there is a table for how many public housing units will be completed in which year, in what area. But going forward, after the 5 years, that would be difficult because we do not have all the land yet for the 290,000 units. At present, we only have land sufficient for 250,000 units. Now, because the details are still outstanding, we are not able to say after 5 years what the completion units will be. Leung Yu Chung, thank you very much for coming to this session. Friends, this is very different from the previous half of the session. For the previous half, the content was rather unidirectional, and the second session is more varied, and it reflects another facet of society. And what is that? And that is, under insufficient resources, people are vying with each other and criticizing each other for their needs. If there is sufficient resources, there will be less criticism of each other. And this goes to show that there is a shortfall of resources as offered by the government. And this is because there is no policy for mid to long-term strategy. Even if the future is completely up in havoc, topsy-turvy, it has nothing to do with me. That's their stance. But for long-term housing strategy, that can no longer be the attitude. Yes, there are 4 words from Mr. Ying so far we've heard. More faster, building more and building faster. Apart from that, there's nothing else, no solution. I've asked this question, and Mr. Ying had not given me the answer. And this afternoon, we have more sessions to go. My question is, so what then? Now that we've voiced our opinions, will you look into them? Will you study them? Will you change? That is important. Now, it's a Saturday morning. This is valuable time. This is time for rest. You're taking the time to come up here. What does it mean? It means that you will just repeat your message, and so you will have done away with us? Mr. Ying, even though friends coming up today have different opinions, but can you tell us how you will respond to the opinions you've heard today? Mr. Ying.
大家都有好多意見，咁喺過往呢有2年幾嘅時間呢，大家又係好多不同嘅場合呢，好多討論。咁意見呢，可能經過討論呢，仍然係大家各方面嘅意見未必一致嘅。但係我哋作為公家，作為大家集體去做嘢呢，總要有一個定奪㗎。咁所以喺舊年呢，經過咗2年幾各個環節傾各種問題之後呢，我哋舊年呢就政府盡量去匯聚各方面得到嘅意見，自己作一啲判斷，就有我哋呢個長遠房屋策略咧嚟到頒布咗，就成為我哋未來工作嘅一個策略，一個框架。咁議員問到頭先有好多朋友，特別第一節都好多朋友咧提到嘅一啲中短期嘅一啲措施，究竟係咪能夠幫得到我哋想幫嘅朋友嘅呢個問題呢？其實我哋喺過往2年幾呢，亦都真係研究過，亦都喺不同嘅場合討論過。就以房屋事務委員會嚟計呢，我哋都因應議員嘅提議呢，我哋係做咗一個比較詳細嘅研究，就收集咗我哋自己過往做租管嘅經驗啦，世界各地做租管嘅經驗啦，世界各地檢討佢哋做租管經驗嘅一啲研究啦，同埋喺一段時間裏邊，我哋香港各界不同嘅市民對於中管嘅睇法嘅各種意見呢，都匯集咗一份文件呢，舊年7月呢，係喺房屋事務委員會嗰度討論過嘅。咁我哋自己嘅睇法呢，喺長策嗰個文件裏邊呢，我哋知道呢個問題大家關心啦，亦都有一個章節呢係特別處理，係濃縮地解釋呢，我哋考慮咗咩因素之後呢，我哋覺得租務管制以法例嘅方式係管制租務呢，對於我哋嘅問題嚟講呢，我哋唔覺得一個好嘅方法去處理。
好，唔該晒。我哋呢個環節呢就完啦，咁我就多謝各位團體呢出席我哋今次嘅會議。我哋下一節呢，最後一節就會係下晝2點鐘開始。